In the world of horror gaming, few series have reached the notoriety of the first-person survival series Outlast. From dealing with the inhabitants of a psychiatric hospital that are suffering from unethical experimentation to an actual death cult in the desert, the Outlast series has a wide range of characters. But who is willing to work through their fears and shows true bravery and a good heart, and who is a true monster in every sense of the word? I'm Caleb with One Up Binge, and this is Outlast: Good to Evil. As usual, we'll be starting out with our most noble characters and working our way down. Regardless of the situation, these characters are willing to do whatever they can to help others and uncover the truth of the more unsavory characters in the games. These characters are the good. Starting off our list, we have the most tragic character, as well as the winner for our Gold Medal of Good, Jessica Gray from Outlast 2. Sure, Jessica is not directly encountered during the main events of the game, but through flashbacks that Blake experiences as he makes his way through the storyline. However, what we see of Jessica's character in these flashbacks are enough to land her in this top spot. Yes, she is just an average student at the school that she, Lynn, and Blake attend, but Jessica is also shown to be a really great friend and deeply cares for others. She does tease Lynn and Blake from time to time and suggests playing pranks on their teachers, such as replacing their nasal spray with hot sauce. But really, all of this is done in a light-hearted way and by no means is malicious. When her supposed suicide is discovered to be a cover-up by Loudermilk, Blake does find himself filled with guilt years later for not doing anything. We deeply wish that Jessica could have enjoyed a full life, and from what we get to know of her during the game is any indication, we feel confident she would have been an amazing person if she had the chance. Right below his childhood friend, we have the main protagonist of Outlast 2, Blake Langerman, getting the Silver Medal of Good. Despite being thrown into the cult war in the desert after his helicopter crashes, Blake is shown to be an incredibly capable guy. After his wife Lynn goes missing, Blake does anything in his power to find her and save her, regardless of the incredibly dangerous setting. And while the argument can be made that Blake is so strong with his desire to save his wife because of his guilt he feels about Jessica, that in no way takes away from his character. Yes, Blake does cause the death of some people, but really, in a life or death situation, we really can't fault him. Unfortunately for Blake, his sanity does take quite a beating during the events of the game, and it seems to be dangling by a thread at the end of the game, such as referring to adults as grown-ups. But for all that he has gone through and his determination to not give up and save those that he loves are reason enough to land Blake this high on our list. When it comes to our Bronze Medal of Good, we are giving it to Wayland Park from Outlast Whistleblower. When it comes to alerting the public to companies' inner workings and secrets, one might expect to be fired or slapped with a lawsuit. What you wouldn't expect is to be beaten up and thrown into a nightmarish hell world. But that is exactly what happens with Wayland after he emails Miles about the activities going on at Mount Massive Asylum. After Wayland is discovered though, he not only has to deal with his former employers, but also the inmates of Mount Massive Asylum, including one of the most terrifying characters of the entire series. Luckily for Wayland though, he is able to evade those he pursues, and unlike other main protagonists in the series, Wayland is able to escape his situation with minimal damage. One of Wayland's shining moments is him being able to upload footage that he was able to record on a camcorder to the internet to alert the world of how demented Murkoff is. And yes, this does make Wayland, as well as his family, an even bigger target for the evil organization. We also know it was the right move to make and have high hopes that he, along with those close to him, are able to stay safe. Wife of Blake and investigative journalist Lynn Langerman of Outlast 2 is taking this spot. While she might not have as much screen time as others, Lynn is shown to be a good person at heart. Lynn deeply cares about getting the truth out to the public, as shown during the interactions between herself and Blake and their investigation of the murder that kicks off the events of the main storyline of the game. And while she does take the stereotypical role of video game damsel in distress for most of the game, what places Lynn this high up is what we know of her interactions closest to her both during the flashbacks and the main storyline. One of the more disturbing facts about Lynn though isn't her fault at all, but we also have several questions. That being the fact that she is seemingly not pregnant by the start of the game, but somehow gives birth to the Antichrist near the end of the game. It's really safe to assume that the cults did something to Lynn that makes her have an insanely accelerated pregnancy, but what that is, we never find out for sure. Whether Lynn does give birth to the Antichrist or not is also pretty unclear, and it is that ambiguity that brings her slightly down. The first protagonist of the series, Miles Upshur from Outlast, is up next. While Miles shares the quality of the previous entries on this list of willing to put himself in dangerous situations to uncover the truth, he is also shown to be a lot snarkier than them as well, as shown in his notes. In spite of his somewhat more cynical attitude though, Miles is very persistent in not giving up on his goals. Even though Miles does suffer from the common video game trait silent protagonist syndrome, he is shown to work with certain inmates of Mount Massive, such as Martin Archibald in some situations, and doesn't seem to have any hostilities towards the more passive inmates. Unfortunately for Miles though, near the end of the game, after he is able to make it to the underground laboratory that Murkoff has the morphogenic engine, Miles is possessed by the Walrider after its previous host dies. It is unclear if Miles is ever freed from his situation, and yeah. While Miles is possessed by the Walrider, he does murder a ton of people. Keep in mind though, Miles is not in control of his actions, and for all that happened prior to him being taken over, given Miles' major points, even he is on the lower section of this category. And finally, rounding up this category, we have one of the few helpful characters in either game, Ethan from Outlast 2. He might have been a member from the Testament of New Ezekiel, but when Blake encounters him, Ethan has become disillusioned with his previous faith. And as the cult has murdered his family, it's hardly surprising. Ethan is willing to provide shelter for Blake from Marta, and when she tries to interrogate Blake's whereabouts from Ethan, he refuses to give up his location. And unfortunately, this does cause Marta to kill Ethan. We truly do wish that Ethan is reunited with his family in the afterlife, but as he has very little screen time and was once a member of the cult, Ethan is landing at the bottom of the good category. Speaking of which, now we are going to be descending down into neutral territory. This is the gray area. Starting off the gray area, we have probably the most persistent character in the first Outlast game, Chris Walker. Alright, let's get this out of the way. Yes, Chris is the guy who kills countless people and attempts to murder Miles numerous times in the game. And yeah, that is pretty bad. So, why is this big fella this high up on our list and missing out on the bad to evil area altogether? Well, we gotta look at why Chris goes on his rampage. Specifically, Chris is trying to prevent the Walrider from escaping by killing as many potential hosts as possible. And while that is a very extreme way to go about trying to prevent something as dangerous as the Walrider from getting out in the open, his goal is an understandable one. Unfortunately for Chris, he not only fails at keeping the general public safe from the Walrider, but he is also killed by it. We do wish that Chris had a less murder-happy method to keep the outside world safe, but as he did have that goal in mind, we are giving Chris this top gray area slot. And rounding up the gray area, we have Martin Archibald from Outlast. Much like Ethan, Martin is one of the few characters that are actually helpful to the player's character, this time Miles Upshur. Unlike Ethan, however, Martin has some darker ulterior motives as to why he is helping. More specifically, he wants the Walrider's influence to grow. And while he has some pretty twisted methods to ensure that this happens, such as drugging Miles to prevent him from escaping. And while he does have some very awful actions to his name, Martin is never hostile towards Miles and even seems to treat his fellow inmates kindly. At the end of the game, Martin sacrifices himself by setting himself on fire and encourages Miles to complete his goal. Much like our next entrant, we could see how some would expect Martin to be in the bad to evil category, but it is his attitude towards Miles and his fellow inmates that lands Martin in the gray area. And finally, we have come to those characters who are truly the stuff of nightmares. These characters are the bad to evil. Papa Knoth's right-hand woman and member of the Testament of New Ezekiel, Marta from Outlast 2 is the first entrant of this category. Much like Chris Walker, Val is one of the most persistent characters encountered in Outlast 2. And yes, Marta does share a lot of characteristics with Chris, but we are ranking Marta this low due to her being not only okay with some of Sullivan Knoth's activities, such as killing all of the cult's children, but also helping him carry out these plans. And unlike Chris, where the Walrider is an actual real and very significant threat to everyone, it is very unclear if the actual children that Marta is killing willy-nilly pose any actual threat. Wanting to protect the world is a noble goal, sure. But killing a lot of kids who pose zero threat whatsoever, that is enough to land Marta in this category. From the Testament of New Ezekiel to the leader of the heretics, Val from Outlast 2 is up next. Originally a member of the New Testament of New Ezekiel, Val left the cult to create her own group, the Heretics. Rather than trying to prevent the birth of the Antichrist, Val and her group are actively trying to bring about its birth and, by extension, the end of the world. A pretty messed up goal to try and achieve. And what makes it worse is that Val and the members of the Heretics kidnap Lynn due to them believing that she was the one that would bring the Antichrist into the world. Blake is able to get Lynn away from Val and her group, thankfully. Less good, however, is the fact that Lynn does give birth, and it is very ambiguous if her child is indeed the one who will destroy the world or just a normal baby. Even though it is debatable if Val is actually successful in her goal, the fact that both she and her followers want to cause the end of the world and their methods to accomplish this goal are reasons enough to land her this low in our list. Our second to last Outlast 2 character is next, Loudermilch. So you might be wondering why someone who is not active in mass murder or trying to bring about the end of the world is ranked below our previous entries. Simple. Rather than mindlessly following orders like Marta, or it being unclear if one's goals were reached like Val, Loudermilch was actually able to carry out his plans and is thinking for himself. Like Jessica, Loudermilch is encountered only during the flashback sequences of the game. And oh boy, does Loudermilch have some sick goals in mind, like trying to get with Jessica. And as far as we know, Loudermilch was able to murder Jessica and stage her death in order to exonerate himself. We don't blame anyone for thinking this absolute monster should be ranked lower. But as Loudermilch only killed one person, even though he isn't under the influence of anyone else, the same cannot be said for our next entries. Barely missing out on our evil medals, we have probably the most disturbing Mount Massive Hospital's patient, Eddie Gluskin from Outlast Whistleblower. Wanting a significant other, absolutely understandable goal to want. But how Eddie goes about this is literal nightmare fuel. Murdering countless inmates and employees of Mount Massive, Eddie used parts of their bodies in order to create an ideal wife for himself. And unfortunately for Waylon, Eddie decided to set his sights on the former Murkoff employee. Like others above him on this list, Eddie is a pretty relentless guy when it comes to trying to get what he wants. However, it is exactly Eddie's persistent desire that leads to his death, as he is impaled on a metal bar when he is attempting to kill Waylon after catching up with him. Sure, Eddie, like the other inmates, was affected by the experiments Murkoff did to him. But seeing how dangerous Eddie was both before and after he was experimented on, we have to admit that we are breathing a sigh of relief that others won't have to be targeted to become Eddie's bride anymore. For the Bronze Medal of Evil, we are giving it to the main source of madness infecting the residents of Mount Massive, the Walrider from Outlast and Outlast Whistleblower. The Walrider is kind of a weird entry for this list. Even though it is the source of most of the inmates' insanity at Mount Massive, the Walrider is not actually alive or a person. Instead, it is a being made up of tiny microbots that possesses immense strength. However, just by itself, the Walrider cannot exist that long without a proper host. Even though the Walrider is not directly encountered until the end of the game, its influence is felt throughout the entire storyline, and seeing the damage done to some of the inmates of Mount Massive only adds credit to the threat level of the Walrider. We aren't really sure what happens to the Walrider after it is able to take control of Miles and leaves Mount Massive at the end of the game, but it can't be anything good. And we aren't even sure if the Walrider can even be stopped. Frightening stuff. Cult leader and final character from Outlast 2, Sullivan Noth, aka Papa Noth, is taking home our Silver Medal of Evil. One's belief is the keystone of who they are as a person. With Sullivan Noth, who he is at his core is a zealot. We absolutely understand finding one's path in life. What we cannot understand is how Sullivan decided that his path in life was to begin the Testament of New Ezekiel cult and then having a mass child murder to prevent the supposed coming of the Antichrist. True, compared to most others encountered in Outlast 2, Sullivan treats Blake and Lynn well. Like with the Walrider though, Sullivan's influence on the other members of the cult is present from the word go. From manipulating Marta into becoming his cult's executioner, to declaring war on the heretics, and we cannot say this enough, ordering a mass murder, to say that Sullivan is a dangerous individual is a massive understatement. Even after Lynn's baby is born, Sullivan attempts to convince Blake to kill the child before taking his own life. We wouldn't be surprised if you might expect Sullivan Noth to be getting gold here, but trust us, our next entrant is much worse. And for our Gold Medal of Evil, we might be cheating a bit, but we are giving it to Murkoff Corp itself from the entire series, as there is really no way to just pick one individual from this twisted company. Seriously, where do we even start with Murkoff Corp? The members of this company have done so much twisted stuff in the course of the series, it is staggering. Unethical experimentation, murder, torture, brainwashing, the list can go on and on. Really, it seems like a hiring requirement to work for this sinister organization is not to have any morals, with the exception being Waylon Park. While characters like Chris Parker have done some pretty awful things, he does have a desire to protect others. Murkoff Corp, however, just wants power. Plain and simple. And they have no problems with the damage they cause in order to get it. One of the more prominent members of Murkoff, Jeremy Blair, is prime example of how twisted the company is. He beats up those who are against them, tries to have them killed, and only looks at others as test subjects for the Walrider. Yes, he does die at the end of Whistleblower, but there are still a lot of members of Murkoff Corp that survive. We only hope that Murkoff Corp is brought to its knees after Waylon is able to alert the world to their actions. And that wraps up our morality spectrum. But before we end things, let's hand out some Sinner Awards. For our Wrath Award, we are giving it to Chris Walker. The dude does have somewhat good intentions, but if killing everyone you encounter is your method to carry them out, you're a clear candidate for this award. we are giving Eddie Gluskin the Lost Award, as he wants the perfect wife, and the less said about that, the better. The Darwin Award is going to Marta. Yes, Marta is a very capable fighter and a dangerous enemy, but she also seems to be somewhat of a blind follower where Sullivan Noth's teachings are concerned and not really thinking for herself. As for the Greed Award, it should be obvious that it is going to the Murkoff Corp, as they want power and will do literally anything to get it. And finally, for the Pride Award, we're giving it to Sullivan Noth, as he not only is the head of his cult, but also views himself as a modern-day prophet. And that's it. Let us know in the comments section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. If you need a one-up, make sure to hit that notification bell and binge our Good to Evil playlist, where we break down the morality of the characters in your favorite games. Thanks for watching.